It is a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Thank you for joining us. It is the Messy Family podcast, if you didn't already get that in the musical intro here.
You didn't know from clicking on the actual podcast.
That's right. And no matter where you are today, we want you to know we're thinking of you.
Yeah. Actually, we've done a lot of traveling in the last, kind of like started our fall travel.
Yes,
and it is so
schedule.
Wonderful to be out there and just like getting together with young families and just meeting beautiful families, beautiful hearts, couples. Everybody's at a different place too. You know, some couples really struggling, some couples kind of ready to take it to the next level, and it's just we're all on this journey, really,
And so if we could just make a personal, we've mentioned this before, but if we could just make a personal appeal to you, if you're listening to this podcast, could you take a few minutes and fill out our annual survey? We do it once a year. We just want to know even the simple things of who you are, not necessarily even your name, but like, you're married, you've had this many kids, or you've,
and we
whatever,
just need a couple hundred more people to take it. That's all.
That's all. And we will, we need to use this. We do use this for all of our planning for the year ahead. And it really helps us have a clear understanding so that we're, the words we're sharing, we know what resonates, what doesn't, what are some things we should do, because we have the podcast, we have a whole bunch of other things. How much are you aware of that or not? It would be great to hear from you. And as a thank you, anybody who does it, in addition to any of the other discounts out there, we have an additional $10 off for any of our courses. And husbands and wives, we actually want to encourage both husband and wife. So if you're the husband listening, if you can get your wife to, because she probably is somewhat influenced by the podcast, and likewise, if you're a wife, get your husband to take the survey.
That's the more important one. If you're a wife who listens, get your husband to take it, even if he doesn't listen to the podcast, because there's a place to say, I don't listen to the podcast.
Which is totally fine.
But there's people relate with us in other ways, like through our resources, courses,
or just
downloads,
they listen
like
to, if you're the one spouse who's that one who's only listening and the other, they just hear it through you. That's fine. That's okay. But it's great to get that insight.
It's like us reading books. I read books. I tell Mike about them.
I don't read. Who reads? But we in general, we frown upon nagging, but this is the one case we might make an exception. If you want to nag your spouse to take the survey,
yes,
that would be great.
Just for us. That's the only time you can nag.
All right. So we have, I think, a fabulous topic today that I think is applicable to everyone at all stages.
Actually, I think you all would find it interesting. So we're going to talk about our rules for arguing, which was the 9th podcast that we did, 8 years ago or whatever. And I was looking, but of course, when we first started the podcast, I didn't have any notes like online or anything. It was only like handwritten notes.
Good old-fashioned way.
Exactly, the old-fashioned way. And so I was going through the file of our handwritten notes, and I found this random handout that Mike was like, oh yeah, I think I remember that from something.
Yes,
I don't know. It's blue paper. It looks a little official. Oh, it was an event.
I think it was an event.
Okay. And it says 7 principles for making marriage work. And it's a summary of a book by Dr. John Gottman, who Mike is a very big fan of.
That's right. Solid principles, amazing principles for marriage, communication. I mean,
and he's like a psychologist, researcher, what?
Correct. All of the above.
Okay.
And
Christian-esque?
Yeah. So he is, now that you say that, I mean, I think
seems a little bit more secular.
Christian friendly, maybe, but it is secular.
Because it's truth.
And it's an institute that does a lot of research into marriage, into divorce, relationships as a whole, and how to make that work. And they've got some, not only just great insights, but they also have a ton of research that has backed up almost everything that they put out, that it's like, they've studied it. They've gone through and they've applied it in counseling sessions, where these principles hold true.
It's like best practices for marriage.
And it's really, really beautiful. And so great wisdom there. But
so somehow you got this handout. And so I was like, oh, this looks like the podcast title. So I started reading through these principles, and it really was confirming over and over things that we talk about, probably because you were formed by going to events like this or, whatever. And we were like, we should go through these principles. And so we've just been talking about them, and so we want to share them for you. And so, so that's why we came up with
7 ways to get more out of your marriage.
Exactly.
So if you're looking for it, and just to set the stage here, for some of you listening, maybe your expectation for marriage, or maybe your marriage isn't going as you thought it would. You know, maybe there's something.
After a couple of years, I don't think anybody's marriage goes the way
if you're honest with yourself, that's all of us.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But if you're not honest with us, you know, or maybe you're really having some struggle right now.
For sure. Yes.
Maybe there's some persistent issues that haven't been resolved that are kind of just lingering in the background, and you're kind of anxious about when they might rear their ugly head. Or you're like some ways all of us too. We want a little bit more. We want more from our marriage.
Because no matter where you're at, everybody can get more out of their marriage. Yeah. I mean, that's just the reality of it, is that you're always growing. None of us are in perfect unity, you know, with each other. Not till heaven will we have perfect unity. And so we have to work on it.
And your marriage matters. Your marriage matters to your, for you personally. We're not going to go through it right now, but marriage, those who are married have higher ratings on income and happiness and mental stability, all these things, right? Just for being married. Your kids, again, the statistics are off the chart for the benefit of your marriage to your children. Yeah. It's phenomenal. Academic, income, all these huge indicators, chastity, passing on the faith, all of these things because you're married. And then what is so beautiful is that society as a whole is better when marriages are thriving. Right. And there's, again, a lot of research that goes into this. So your marriage matters. Your time invested in your relationship, and not just saying, hey, we're good, but going to the next level and saying we want more. We want something of greater substance in our marriage. And so that's what we want to do. Take time, is that no matter where you are, it didn't come out as you had wanted. You're in some level of crisis or tension.
This is for everybody.
Or you're like, I want to go to the next level. Now, if you're like got a perfect marriage and you can't grow, you probably can stop right now and send us an email of your best tips.
Exactly.
But otherwise, if you're like the rest of us.
Yeah. And I think that just kind of like exactly what you just said right there about some people who don't fight a lot. I think that is probably, or feel like, oh, I don't need to get any more out of my marriage. Maybe that's just because their personalities are so perfectly enmeshed. Well, that's awesome, but that's not the way it is for everybody else. Okay, so first of all, just want to say that he starts off the book talking about the key to getting more out of your marriage, or the key to things to look at, is not really how often you fight. Yeah. Because I think that Mike and I would love to know, actually, I should probably look this up. What is like the average number of fights that a married couple has?
On a daily basis? Or
like over like a week or a month or something like that? Because we definitely fought more when we were first married, the first 5 years of marriage. I'm going to add that to our survey. Okay, you should. Well, I don't know. That's like, all right, whatever.
That's personal.
But the key, what he talks about, is not how often you fight. And so that's, in a way, it's irrelevant. Right. Because everybody's different. But it's what are you like when you're not fighting? Yeah. Because if you're like happy fight, happy fight, you know, he's like, that's really okay. But the key is that you have those happy times where you're getting filled up and you're acting in friendship, in relationship, but then you have a disagreement, right? You know, and I think that, and that's pretty much, I think that's our MO.
and again, kind of already alluded to this, but like then there are those moments where maybe we have a big flare up, but it's not very often. But when we do, it's never really fully resolved, and there's like a underlying tension that stays there. That can be more dangerous than people even who argue or fight more often. Because
we have had everybody's marriages goes through cycles, and obviously we're very honest with all of you on this podcast. And we've definitely been through, and we've talked about this a little bit, you know, different low points in our marriage where I felt like when we did have a fight, it was never quite resolved. And then it's like that took a big withdrawal, if you will, out of that emotional bank account that never really got replenished, which then leads to, or in our experience led to, and it happens for everybody, a constant kind of coldness or I just don't want to engage,
right.
Right. Or
and I think
bickering.
And it created a wall, right? It created this idea,
even when we weren't actively fighting,
because then we just put up some barriers to protect ourselves and recognizing, okay, this is off limits. This is an area where I'm going to say, you know what, we're either not going to go there, or I'm not going to let you in, and therefore I'm building barriers and separations.
And to be clear, that is not healthy.
That is not healthy. and again, everybody goes through struggles. Everyone goes through cycles.
Yeah.
And we want to actually, maybe at the end, we can share a little bit of kind of applying some of these several principles, particularly in our relationship and a struggle that we have had. Because again, we're sharing these principles that can be applied in any marriage, regardless of where you're at. But we want it to be applied. And the beauty of these principles is they are universal in that they apply to all married couples.
Because I think that if you don't apply, if you're not moving forward in your marriage, then the worst thing that could happen is just having again, kind of going back to those fights that aren't resolved and this low constant bickering that never gets talked about.
Yeah.
And that's when you have people just living together as like married singles. Yeah. And then it can get even worse.
Meaning they were just like partners, business partners, like managing the household and the kids or whatever,
exactly.
but actually as a relationship.
And then it can get to just simply not even caring.
Right. And the opposite of love isn't necessarily hate. It's indifference. And it's like when we've allowed that indifference, and again, we've shared in the podcast before, challenges we've gone through. And I think we are stronger today in our marriage than we've been ever. However, even just a couple of years ago, we've had some.
It didn't feel like that.
Yeah, it didn't, and it felt like a very low point.
Yeah.
And so these ideas, these principles, these really tried and tested true principles are worth trying to incorporate. And again, there's 7 of them, but as we unpack them, one of them again may resonate more like, oh, that's a good application. So feel free to pause as you're getting it to take a little note, but we'll also wrap up at the end and give you some practical takeaways.
Yeah. So, okay.
So want to go to the first principle?
Yeah. So go ahead, do the first principle. I'll just read it. So the first principle is enhance your love maps. And since Mike knows more about this than me, he's going to explain what the love maps are.
So again, love maps, think about it like, the synapses in your brain, right? Meaning that there are connections. There are ways that we think about our spouse, way that we think about our marriage. And the love map is how strong your love map is how often are you making connections with your bride or your groom, the husband, wife, your spouse, and saying, okay, these are the experiences I have with them. This is the history we have. This is the connections, those moments where
these are the things that they like. This is the kind of person that, like, knowing your spouse's personality, knowing their love language, knowing how they grew up, like all of those kinds of things.
Yes, and it's about making those stories, if you will, relevant. And so the bigger and broader that map is. And there's just simple strategies of recalling that for yourself, of thinking about your spouse in that way. Again, this is a principle that is true for every situation, right? Thought, feeling, action. And, the way we think influences the way we feel, which influences the way we act. And so the more that we can have a strong and enhanced love map, and again, you can go into the book to go to greater detail.
Yeah.
But if you simply think of it as how many of those connecting points in my mind are mapping my heart to my spouse's heart and who they are. Right. And again, we'll dive. Some of the other principles go a little deeper.
One of the things that I had always thought about is, and we talked about this, like for when you fall in love with someone, that it is seeing the mystery inside of them, because everybody has a mystery within them. Like no one can ever, sorry, I'm like saying this all backwards. No one can ever fully know me, right? Only God can fully know me, know all of my thoughts, words, every single moment of my life. Only God can know that.
Right.
But when you fall in love with someone, what you're doing is that you're glimpsing part of that mystery within them.
The other person.
And you're saying, I want to spend my whole life getting to know that person. I want to spend my whole life finding that mystery. And that's like, I feel like that's like the love map, is like really knowing you, to really know you. I don't just know your personality, who you are today, but also knowing where you've come from.
Yeah.
And what are your successes? What were your difficulties? What were, all of that.
And I do feel like
that's why getting married young is actually a good thing, because then you know even more of your spouse's life.
And you have a person. It's not just it is knowledge, but it's that knowledge based upon experience of them, as well as just some kind of history, which really leads into the second part, really, which is this nurturing a fondness and admiration for your spouse. So that's the
second principle, is nurture your fondness and admiration for them.
Because I feel like these bleed one into each other, right? And again, this is going deeper into that idea of knowledge of your spouse. But it's also kind of looking at their traits and saying, I see a giftedness in you. Not just you're physically beautiful, but you've got a generous heart. You have a great work ethic. You have a passion for blank, blank, blank. Looking at them and looking at their both virtues, their character traits, their experiences, looking at their kind of the history that you have, and stoking those flames, right? Because it's not simply about being passively aware as if you have a fact.
Exactly.
It's about it being consciously present to you. We, again, when I used that earlier, that thought, feeling, and action, there were times to kind of use this technique.
Wait. Don't go there yet. Because first of all, so there's 3 ways that you can nurture that fondness and admiration. So one is, like you were just saying, listing those positive character traits. And that is a habit that we actually talk about on the podcast a lot, which is honoring.
Yes.
And it's not just saying you're really generous, but it's also saying, you're really generous. I saw how you made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the poor, and you brought them down there. And that's just, and so so that's how we've taught our children to honor each other, which having is by having like the character quality, but then also giving an example.
Making it real. And this is, again, heavily for you, but also in expressing that.
Right. So that's one way to do it, is list those character traits and honor them in that way. And so for us, it's like finding the times, making times within your home, within the rituals, within your family culture to do that. Yeah. But then the second thing that they suggest is to look at the history of your marriage and remember, this is why like things like photo albums and old movies are so good. And
in the book, I remember they went through like even just a list, like write down, almost journaling, right? Yeah. And say, what was one of the magical moments that you had in your marriage? Right. What about an adventure that you had together? Right. What was that most romantic time you had together? And again, it's calling to mind and making alive. And I also think like
recalling even difficulties and saying, we overcame this together. This was something we worked as a team and we were able to overcome.
Remember when I was unemployed and then we struggled through this, and the way that you and I worked together and supported each other and felt like this was not just my problem, but our problem, or whatever.
So that's another exercise you can do to nurture that fondness. But then the last thing is positive thoughts. So go ahead.
And so again, that idea of the thought, feeling, and action. Right. And the thought being that, like, so there are times when I'll just say for myself that I didn't necessarily feel loved. And I know you've had the same experience, right? But in my mind, I had to say, because it wasn't on a malicious, it wasn't bad, it wasn't wrong, it was me in my mind being able to say, I don't even want that negative thought to enter my mind. And so I say in my head, I know she loves me.
Yeah.
And then, the positive thought as well is, as she's cleaning up the house at the end of the day, taking care of things that the kids forgot with their chores or whatever, that she is loving me and loving our household.
Right.
Like, and bringing that forward.
Right.
Sometimes it's like an antidote for a negative thought.
Yeah.
And other times it's a positive deposit. So that those thoughts can really well up inside us, that there is a fondness. I am, because it's
almost like a visualization exercise where you have a thought and that evokes an emotion.
That's right. And because we are like, so if you think about what music, what movies, what do you surround yourself with, right? So if you look at, it's sometimes easier to look at a kid, right? But you say you put a child and you give them nothing but, sorry, time to pray.
Everybody talked about putting your phones away.
I know. Dang.
Somebody's not paying attention. No, go ahead.
but for our kids, right? So like if we surrounded our kids with nothing but garbage shows, and foul language in their music that they listen to,
you are bad, you are horrible, nobody loves you, everybody hates you,
and they're surrounded with this. Would it be any surprise that they feel a little depressed or angry or what have you, right? Of course not. Why? Because we're surrounded with that. Well, we are masters of even our mind and the thoughts that we allow to linger and dwell on. Are we going to spend our time thinking about the negative?
Right.
Are we going to spend time thinking about the things that are all wrong? We are in charge of having a good day.
Well, one of the
and so we're in charge of even our emotions,
our
right? And that begins with the thoughts we put in our head that have that influence.
So I actually literally just this morning was reading Philippians 2, where it says, fill your minds, with those things that are good, that are of value, that are worthy, that are worthy of repeating. Like fill your mind with these things. And, the scriptures tell us to do this because we should think about good things and even about our spouse. Right. And that will help us because we have that connection, that, what is it? Thought, feeling, action.
Right.
To have that connection as our whole person.
That's right.
That will then affect our relationship.
And don't belittle that, right? Those things matter. Those little investments matter. And this isn't saying we're ignoring any big issues or there are things that we don't need to deal with. Right. However, there is no strength. There's no successful marriage that allows those negative and oftentimes it's our perception, right? Oftentimes we have to recognize that we might be perceiving this situation. And again, for me, I may have been looking at the world in a wrong way. I have to say, no, that's not true. They didn't mean it the way that I first interpreted it. I'm gonna
and remembering those good things, I guess. Right. Okay. So the third principle is turn towards each other instead of away. And what this made me think of is we talk about that emotional love tank, that each one of us have, that we need to make sure that.
Explain the emotional love tank.
All right. So this is a concept or whatever that in the 5 love languages, the book, The 5 Love Languages, he talks about when we love somebody, we're making like these small deposits in their heart. Right. And this is true for any person. It's true for our children, but in this situation, we're just talking about our spouses.
In our spouses.
Right. Because we're connected to them, by our vocation, spiritually and otherwise. So we need to make deposits in that and use their love languages to help them to receive our love. Yeah. Because if my love language, right, if I receive love by getting gifts, well, if you are, cleaning the house and, making me coffee and everything, then I may appreciate it, but I don't really feel loved. I feel more loved if you bring me flowers or you make a little something for me. If that gift giving, that's how maybe I would receive love
how you're gonna get filled
more
up.
Impactfully. Right. Exactly. That's how I would get filled up. And so that's when he's saying turn towards each other, realize that daily connection throughout the day of showing our spouse how we love them, that we're thinking about them, and using the love language is a great tool to do that. But,
and if you think about it this way, it's what we do matters. And if you're not feeling it, you can still make a decision. Say, I'm going to think and act based upon how about I just try acting like I love them?
But what if spouses don't know what to do?
And well, hold on. The idea here is that love is not an emotion. A love is a decision. So if you're having some challenges, make a decision to love. Make a decision to turn towards them and not away from them.
Right. But what if the spouse is like, well, I don't even know how to love them? I think that's when it's like, you just have to have that conversation.
Yeah. And I think that it's a part of a discovery, and it's also part just asking. Cause I think the worst thing that any spouse can say to another is, well, I just assumed you knew what I meant, or I just expected, I'm like, you're trapped. And then not to help fill in the blanks, right? Wives, a lot of husbands don't know what you're thinking or what might fill you up, what might love on you, right? And we might need some. And there is and I do appreciate that if I do something more spontaneously that she wasn't seeking and she wasn't asking for this, specifically, there is that was very thoughtful. Oh, you really went out of your way to think of this and be creative. I'm not great at buying clothes, or I need some more specific instructions. I do seek out others' help and, mm-hmm. but there is a natural point for us as men and women to get to a point in our marriage to say, it's okay for someone to say, this is how you can really love me. Right. When the spouse is asking, help me, please.
What do you want us to do more of, even together? That's maybe it's like, you know what? It would really bless me if we could just have breakfast together every morning.
Yeah.
Or if we
could.
This
is a great discussion topic.
This is another thing that you can do. So all of these things are things that everybody can work on.
That's right.
But, ask your spouse, how can I just show you love for you during the day? Sometimes it's, I wish you would just call me in the middle of the day to check in on me. I really would love to get a text from you or whatever. It's good for us to be curious. This is what we mean about continually getting to know your spouse. You have to work on it.
That's right.
You got to actually ask. And you have to say when your spouse asks you, you need to make sure that you say it. All right. So principle 4, let your partner influence you.
Ooh. Okay. Yeah. This is where it gets, not that they aren't, there's challenges on each level, but for some people, this is a very challenging principle. Let your partner, let your spouse influence you. And I'll just say as a man, sometimes this is challenging.
Meaning what?
Well, I think that we too often feel like we're supposed to have all the answers or what have you. But I'll say that...
And it's hard to ask your wife, what do you think about this?
Sometimes it's hard to do, but I'll say that maybe it's because of who you are. I feel like you...
You mean maybe it's just hard for you, but it's not hard for other men?
No. I say it's not really that hard for me because because you're very wise. You've got a lot of insight. But I feel like I would share my day with you, and I counted you and still do as my greatest counselor, meaning the person who gave me good advice because you knew me really well. And so for some, there might be an issue or a challenge with overcoming some pride or what have you, but it's also really beneficial, especially in those situations. One, it's good to humble ourselves before our spouse. But for some, that's a real challenge to invite them in and really seek their ability to influence them. But you've helped me see things, particularly with the children, that I didn't see. But you've helped me in work in the past to see people and situations in a new light.
Well, and I think that that's a great way too for women to for wives to honor their husbands by kind of on the flip side of asking them for advice and bringing situations to them. I think that just shows such a respect and an honor, and then really taking that in, allowing them to influence you. I think that when, if we're having conversations with our spouse and our spouse is like, well, it seems to me that blah, 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 and we just automatically reject, well, you don't understand the situation. And so we reject that. We're really losing out, because it's so good in our lives to have that different perspective, especially from somebody who really loves you. And
just saying this for, and again, maybe I'm unique, but I don't think so. Men love when women come and seek our counsel or kind of reveal their vulnerability. Yeah. Because I'm married to a very strong, confident woman. When you do that, it makes me stand up taller. It bands me, kind of like, wow, you're entrusting this situation to me, or you think I have some insight, and I may not have insight into it, right? But the fact that you are seeking counsel, you're seeking advice, you're coming to me, it really shows me a lot of respect. And I think, again, a core need for men is that respect. Yeah. And that when you do that, that's what I feel. I feel very respected in that way.
And I think that when you make decisions together, and this, when I was reading about this, it reminded me of a principle that we have said is that it's better to be wrong together than right alone. And I think that that's like allowing your spouse to influence you, and you need to make a decision in your family just to recognize that it's not Mike's family, it's not my family, it's our family. And that it's better that we make something, that we allow each other to influence each other, and that we do it together right? Then one of us is like, oh no, this is the way that should be. This is the perfect plan. And you disagree. I'm not going to allow you to influence me. I'm just going to go on my own. Like that's just not a way to a great marriage. A way to a great marriage is allow your spouse to influence you and just say, you know what, no matter what, we're going to do this together. Maybe it's not the perfect plan, but I'm willing to give it a try.
Yes.
I'm willing to listen.
And all right, so number 5 and 6 are related,
right?
In principle, and
these are kind of sticky, but
but
important.
This is where the rubber hits the road, right here. Yeah. Okay, so and number 5 is solving the solvable problems,
and then number 6 is overcoming perpetual problems and not allowing them to form into gridlock. So that's 5 and 6, but let's talk about 5 first.
Okay, so 5 is
solvable problem. What's the solvable problem?
So first is distinguishing between what's solvable and what's perpetual, right? In the Gottman principles here. And the idea of a solvable problem is that it's based on a situation that we're in. Right. And it's in the context of it not being connected to some deeper or fundamental issue. Right. Again, that's so there is a problem that actually has a solution that is achievable without complete loss of identity in the other, right? And so a solvable problem. Well,
example we came up with was like, and this has happened actually at the beginning of the school year many times, right? But like I have an account that I'm spending out of for our, family operations of things that we have to do, and also just for household expenses, and then for food, right? And in September, there's lots of extra expenses. There's extra fees. Boys need cleats. There's, the pictures for this. There's tuition for that. There's, all of these different things. And so I'm spending out of that household a lot faster. And so instead of 4 weeks, maybe that is gone in 3 weeks, and so then this is a solvable problem, but Mike could come to me and be like, well, what the heck? I went to get something I went to buy paint, for something I want, and there's nothing left in this account. Where did all the money go? Right. So that could lead to a argument, depending on how it's approached.
Because again, and I'd say back in particularly earlier days, but they're still persistent in different areas, right? Problems still arise again through this. But if you look back for me looking at it and saying, okay, the money is gone, and you were the one spending the money. And you, and what was your deal, woman? And it could easily devolve just even the way that I approached it. Right. And that is a solvable problem.
Right. And so they give, and this is actually, I think this is so helpful too. And so this little part is kind of what we were going to do a whole podcast on.
And really this could almost be its own topic. Yeah. This could how to argue and win every fight. Right. Isn't that the rules? Something like that.
So we're going to give you, here's like 5, or I guess it's 6 things. 6? Yeah. 6 ways to deal with these solvable problems. Okay. And a lot of these things, I think that people, maybe you instinctively know, but it's good to go over them. So first of all, distinguish between what is solvable and what is unsolvable. Okay. So that's the first thing. Right. And if it is solvable, then first of all, you need to really soften your heart. Okay, so we can kind of keep going back to the finance example.
So
soften your heart and go ahead.
So by softening our heart, a specific example of this is using I statements. So it's no longer you caused this problem. Right. It says, moving it to an I statement.
I'm confused.
I don't have any more money. No. I'm concerned or confused about how we got here.
Exactly.
And seeking to understand. Right. However, I'm going to say this. So everyone always talks about these I statements and I believe it's important. I believe. But it's like when you recognize that you're just using I, but actually in your heart and even coming out is just kind of like a passive aggressive, like boom, like I can't believe you did this. I am so undermined by what you did. I am furious that you. Again, it's about the heart. It starts
with I, but it still ends with the you.
And so what we have to do is that the softening of the heart is really taking a pause.
Yeah, so true,
saying, I want to understand.
Yeah.
And that, again, this would be my nuance in the this perspective is that the seeking to understand, that you're softening your approach as opposed to you have all the information and you've already cast a judgment.
I like this seeking to understand, which is I feel like it's a nice way.
Got it going on. Okay,
but he says like describe what's happening without judging or evaluating.
Right, which is seeking understanding. Right,
you're going be clear, be polite. I do think that whole idea of being polite is so important. It's like a little thing, but it kind of
deal.
Like falls back on your muscle memory of saying, excuse me.
It elevates their respect.
Exactly. Be appreciative and don't store things up. In other words, when those things happen, don't wait until this, you go out of budget or whatever, just to kind of go back to the finance example. Don't wait until it's been 5 months, no, say it, don't store it up.
Yeah.
Say it right away. But then also learn how to make and receive repair attempts. So that means basically de-escalate. Bring it. So if you start in harsh, right? And actually he says that women more often than men start in harshly, which I can understand.
That? Yeah.
I don't know. I think because women use words as weapons more often than men do.
You're really much more skilled at that than I.
Anyway, but it says so I am going to list some repair attempts, which I actually think are really, really so helpful. So repair attempts, in other words, in the midst, so you're in an argument, right? You've already kind of gotten there. And then you're like, okay, wait a minute. How do I bring this down? How do I bring this down? There's phrases like, I'm really feeling scared. I'm really feeling sad right now.
Right.
I need to calm down.
Right.
Not I need you to calm down. Just
pro tip, that never works.
Don't say that. Or I'm sorry. Or I agree with part of what you're saying. I really appreciate that a lot, actually.
And again, I'm not saying to distract or delay the conversation if it's necessary, but even to the point of saying, I need some time to cool down.
Yes.
Can we come back to this?
Yes.
Or I agree with you on that part.
Right.
Let's have another conversation when we get into the rest of this. Would that be okay? Right. That's de-escalating. That's taking it down.
And I think that one of the reasons that is so important is the next little tip here is flooding.
Yeah.
All right. So it says soothe yourself and your spouse to prevent flooding, which is something that is I guess it's kind of like a new concept that I really wasn't aware of until the last few years. But go ahead. Why don't you?
All right, so flooding
Mike encountered this in his counseling.
But flooding, it isn't exclusively to men, but a lot of men it happens to.
Oh yeah.
And it's
yes, it does say men are more prone to flooding than women.
And so when we're in an argument,
what does that mean?
There's a fight and flight. In there, along with that, fight, flight, or flood is often what it's seen as, right? And by flooding means you have so much emotions coming in that you actually kind of shut down,
right? That
you are and you kind of become cool as a cucumber. And it may, for the male mind, think no, I'm disconnecting. I'm whatever, because we have an ability to compartmentalize. And
that's probably why that ability to compartmentalize is
what we've done is
when emotions come, you're like, boom, I can't deal with this right now.
Shut off. Not that you become a robot, but you're
not engaging.
You're not engaging, and you're not allowing anything to hit you, which means you're trying to safeguard yourself.
And so even if your wife,
it's a protection or safe defense
even if
mechanism.
your wife is trying to repair and she starts saying some of those statements which are good, they can't be received.
It's almost a wall that is now present where you can't enter, and you don't allow others to enter. Again, it's a defense mechanism, and we have to realize that's the again fight, flight, or flood. Right? Those are the quick reactions. What are you going to do? You're in an argument? You're in a disagreement. Are you going to fight? Are you going to walk away?
Yeah.
Because some people get so angry they just have to walk away.
And I think that
or are you just going to be there, but you're just going to be like,
right. Well, I think that too. One of the reasons that maybe men are more prone to it, in addition to the compartmentalizing, is that they recognize I'm not going to fight my wife because if I fight, I'm going to lose control. Yes. And I think that there is a healthy,
sometimes, yes.
There can be a healthy fear of if I start raising my voice, I'm just not going to stop. And I have this power because men have this physical power. They're louder, all of that. And you're like, I don't want to go there, so I'm just going to shut down.
And I, again, just going with that, thinking of the times that I have raised my voice at you.
I just start to cry.
But that's serious. But that has actually, affected me deeply. Like nobody likes yelling, right? Nobody likes.
It's not helpful.
Just internally, right?
Yeah.
But when I have had a greater issue with anger, and I usually could hold it off. But once we got to a point where I didn't think you were listening to me anymore, or I wasn't being heard on my perception.
Because maybe I was shutting down,
maybe,
too.
or I just didn't perceive it that, whatever.
Yeah.
I did get angry and I did lose. I'm like, and yelled in such a way that you ended up crying, which then changed the entire subject, right?
Yeah.
And then it makes me melt. But I've gotten out of that. But there are times, and I don't think really much anymore, but there were times where, because I saw that as a negative, the anger, I just took it. I just took what I perceived as attacks and then just saw it and say, forget it. I'm shutting off. This is I'm done.
Yeah.
And even though I didn't walk away, even I didn't say those words, that's what I was.
Well, what do you do when that happens?
Well,
that's the thing, right?
This is why the
when you start flooding, I think that's the
principles was soothe yourself and your partner, and soothe is de-escalating, right? In some ways, but soothing is recognizing that you know what, there is a lot going on here, and physically,
I need a break. Yeah,
physically, you might need a pause. This is where some great techniques that we have done at certain times is we're actually walking together. For a guy, physically in motion, it's easier to get those synapses reconnected. But what you have to do is recognize that because you're at this heightened point, your synapses in your brain have fused. It's harder to think, it's harder to engage, and you might need to call the timeout, or you need to have some other way that it really kind of takes that temperaure down.
Do you know what's one of the easiest things to do too is just breathe. And I've talked about this with my counselor, just like how, just like taking a breath, like in your nose, out your mouth, simply doing that, taking a break. If you experience your partner, your spouse is shutting down, being flooded, just be like, or even if you're recognizing that in yourself, take a break. Just be like, you know what? I'm not leaving this forever, but I can't process anything else right now. Right. And walking forces that breathing to happen. And that also kind of like enables you to have some space so you can come back and re-engage. But it's so important to recognize in our spouse and in ourselves.
And another strategy under this, solving the solvable, is compromise. Now, they talk about finding areas of agreement. They're finding areas where you can be more aligned. And I'll tell you, I don't like compromise. I don't like it as a word. I don't like doing it.
Because it feels like everyone's losing something.
Yeah. And it might be just a semantics for me. But what I do like is uniting, finding areas of agreement, which is how they're kind of defining compromise. I'm like, okay, no, I agree with that.
Yeah,
I don't like the word compromise,
right?
Maybe, but I do think that the ideal is that we're finding a solution that we couldn't have found on our own. That
absolutely.
We're really creating
synergy.
Yeah, right. I really prefer that idea.
I do too. Yeah.
Again, compromise is a good backstop and is a good beginning. I just don't think that for a robust marriage, for a next level marriage, you want to just say, hey, we just compromise. Now, in those solvable solutions, it might be, let's use the finances as an example, right? So a compromise,
what can we agree on?
A compromise might simply, in this argument about,
let's
money
not say compromise, that areas of agreement, something we can agree on.
So something we can agree on, right, is saying, okay, well, this is the amount of income we have, and therefore we need to do a better job of saving around the beginning of the school year.
Or even just saying, we agree that we don't have enough money this month.
That could be something. Or
we don't have enough money. It's our money,
that because it has to be our money.
Right.
And we have to agree that we need to communicate more about where we're at. Like, hey, before the all the purchases are made, just so you know, I don't know how we're going to make it through.
Exactly.
Unless I go over.
Because what I found is that, again, just kind of going back to this finance example, is that when an area of agreement, I was almost like compromise, an area
that was close.
An area of agreement would be that we need to communicate better about this issue.
Yeah.
Even saying that, of like saying, you know what, before I, bought those cleats, paid those team fees or whatever, I could have said to you on the front end, hey, I need to buy these things. What do you think is the best way to do it? So it's something we're doing together, keeping my spouse
mutual
in the loop.
decision, mutual accountability. It's
exactly.
It's hard. Like, again, using that specific example, an agreement was, hey, we're not going to do this alone. This isn't your burden to figure out how you're spending for school supplies and cleats and whatnot. It's ours, and we got to do it together. And and I can't point a finger at you. I can point a finger at this thing stinks that we're, whatever.
Right. That we're caught in here or whatever. And I think that kind of coming at it, seeking to understand, and then coming to a place of like, how do we do this? Well, I know that we can agree on here. And starting there, finding those areas of agreement, because you could always find something that you can agree on, even if it's just, this is a really difficult thing to talk about.
That's right.
That's right. Even if that's all you agree on.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Great. Start there. That's a good place to start. And then if you need to take that break, you can come back to it. And then the last little thing about overcoming these solvable problems, a lot of strategy is to be tolerant of each other's faults. If you have a spouse, for example, who's just not good at communication because they're frantic and they're forgetting things, or they just have a lot of little kids and going on, just be tolerant of that and just kind of recognize, I get it that you didn't tell me ahead of time about these fees.
I know you got a lot. Not only the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
I love you.
Right.
In this.
Right.
Imperfect,
Exactly.
area,
Like I recognize, I remember when I was running classes once, and I had one of many times, and I was talking to this husband whose tuition bill was overdue, and I had been asking the wife for it, and she just kept forgetting. And I remember talking to the husband, and he just goes, you know what? Julie's just not very good at remembering these things. In the future, just talk to me, And it was so sweet though, the way he said it, because he obviously really loved his wife, and he just had a sigh of like, yeah, like that's not her gift.
That's okay. And that's okay, right?
Exactly.
Own it and be comfortable.
Exactly. He recognized that, and he was tolerant. She thought that it was because she said she put herself down as the contact, and the husband was like, you know what? We've talked about it. This is not going to work. And so
here's
I think
a better fit.
Exactly.
Here's a better fit.
And be tolerant. That's
and again, that would taking of these, 5 or so strategies, right, in the solvable problems and having those conversations.
Yeah.
It's leading you to a solution. It's leading you towards greater unity going forward.
Right.
That doesn't mean you're going to solve every single problem, but every time you do it, you're going to be learning greater muscle memory, but greater skill at having conversations that are fruitful. Because again, the goal that we've always talked about, the goal of every argument is unity. Right. And so if you set that as one of your goals, whenever you're having an argument or discussion, that it's really towards a more unified end, that's the great fruit of solving these solvable problems, because you're getting to a place where you now are both more united in that solution.
And this is one of the reasons too that we have a lot less arguments over these solvable problems than we did when we were 5 years married or 10 years married, because we've just kind of learned, and we've been through a lot of different issues.
We've solved some of those problems.
Yeah, we solved some of those problems.
But we've also learned how to focus on the unity.
Exactly.
And again, not perfect, and we still stumble.
Okay, so then number sixth principle here is for getting more out of your marriage is learning how to overcome perpetual problems and overcome gridlock. Okay, so what is a perpetual problem? Perpetual problem, a definition of that, is that this is a fundamental difference in personality. For example, you have one spouse who is very maybe free-flowing and flexible and maybe forgetful, maybe has ADD, and you have another spouse who one of their core values is responsibility. And working together is those are personality different. Neither of them are right or wrong. There's the way they are, but they're fundamental differences in their personality or fundamental differences in their lifestyle needs. I was just reading, Wendell Berry is one of my favorite authors. And I was just reading The Memory of Old Jack, who is a character in the town of Port Williams. And Old Jack was a farmer, very talented, very hardworking, but he married a woman who wanted him to be more like a town farmer, more of a land baron, a landowner, someone who, and he had the talent to do that, to manage tracts of land, to hire other people to help him. But old Jack, he wasn't old at the time, but Jack realized, he was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be responsible for other people. I don't want to even owe someone money who works for me. I find it really hard to work for people. I just want to work on my own. So that was like that lifestyle. She had one vision for her life that she wanted, and he had one vision for his life, and neither of them were ready to go through this process, you know. Right. But
they didn't have the Gottman Institute, and they didn't have the Messy Family podcast.
They did not. So that was a fundamental difference in the lifestyle needs. And then often, so this kind of issue, and this is the thing, is that it's not that couples don't have these issues, but the problem happens when you have this issue and there's a danger of it calcifying.
Yeah.
If it's a ongoing problem that creates an overarching tension. So when we were given that example of the of a conflict that you have that is unresolved, you get to the end and it's never resolved, and you just kind of leave with this. It's just unresolved. There's a tension in the air, and then you just continue to live with that, and then this is what happened actually in the book for old Jack. He and his wife got to the point where it was like, well, this is what I think you should do. Well, this is who I am. It's not changing. It was complete gridlock to the point they were just kind of lived as married singles almost their entire lives. And they lived in a loveless marriage for 50 years,
right?
You know, and that's so sad.
And because what they've done is they've looked at each other. And again, talking about these perpetual problems, if you will, it's inherent in the very nature, if you will, of the individual, meaning they're fundamentally created and ordered in this way, and the others in another way that makes it, increase the attention, right? And you use the example of, maybe somebody who was, slower and slower to process, slower to act, right, and one who has a high level, values responsibility very highly, or getting things done, or what have you. And there's a natural tension and a conflict. Well, that becomes a problem when we look at the other and see them as the problem.
Exactly.
And when we talked about the solvable problems, we looked out together and saw a problem that we could fix together.
Yeah.
But the problem here is that they're wrongly perceiving the other as the problem.
Exactly.
And then the tension doesn't get away, doesn't relieve, there's no release, there's no escalating. And really, what do you do with that?
Right. And I think that one of the things that he's talking about in this is, first of all, recognizing that just what you said is not saying your spouse is the problem, is recognizing you're not in charge of changing your spouse.
Because every spouse, when you get married, they are stamped with ASIS on their forehead, as is.
That's right.
We know that we can't change another person, but really, at the end of the day, God made them. Ultimately, it's the Creator's design and the Creator's tolerance, maybe, or whatever, And so at the end of the day, if we recognize who can we control, who can we change?
That's right. Who's in charge?
Who's in charge, right? It's us, right?
Yeah.
And so even with our spouse, there might be perceived character flaws in our spouse. And this is where it gets tricky, because we all want the best for our spouse. We want our spouses to be virtuous. Now, and again, and I'm not talking about, if you're in an extreme situation where you're not safe, that's an entirely different scenario. We're not talking about that, right?
That's above our pay grade.
Right. That's, but in the context of a normal but challenging situation in a marriage where you have this major conflict, you can't solve it, because then you're trying to fix them or change them. So what you have to do is you have to shift your focus, because again, in the number 5 was solving those problems. In number 6, it's really about how to either overcome or manage those perpetual problems, because the
differences that are between you.
It's viva la différence, right? There's a fundamental shift that we need to take, is that when we try to solve a problem, and it's perpetual. It keeps coming back. It keeps rearing its head. I thought we'd address this, but it's still coming back.
And it's very emotional, and it's very intense for both of you.
And it never gets done.
Yeah.
You may have a perpetual problem that may need to be kind of, how do we deal and manage with this?
Exactly.
So that we can have a more united marriage. Again, the goal is still the same, a united marriage.
Right.
So I'll give, do you want me to do the example?
Sure.
All right. So here's a little story. Again, where I'll be a little vulnerable with you. So just don't share this too much. But I fell in love with my bride because one of the reasons, not only she was drop dead gorgeous and was a great musician and had all these other great qualities, but she also had a deep sense of who she was. She had a deep confidence that really, allowed her to go up. She was a musician. She traveled around. She could speak in front of crowds. But she also had the confidence to tell me that I was always wrong. No, that's not true.
That's not part of the story.
That's not part of the story. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So, but this confidence sometimes would come out in ways that I didn't like.
Well, because when we were first married, we did a lot of, we were involved in Engaged Encounter. So we were always we were in meetings, we were in gatherings. Mike was also in politics. And so we would be at dinners or at gatherings or conferences and things. Right. We were in public situations a lot. And
Alicia, at the time, I didn't perceive it as a positive. Some of that confidences came out she would say things, whether I agree with or not, she would be quick to jump in and ask a question and so forth. And
or give a comment or ask for clarification or whatever.
And so we'd be at a public event and she would be the first one to ask a question or close to it. Mm-hmm. And
I'm still kind of like that.
And you 100% still like that, 100%. And in the beginning, I was kind of embarrassed. There was this sense that I wanted to be liked, and I'm the diplomat, and I would kind of, I was slow to speak and quick to listen, and letting, come in at the end with some really great idea because I've listened to everybody's thoughts, and Alicia would just jump in and say, hey, what about this? And she was okay risking, at least what I perceived as risking, and it made me uncomfortable.
So we would have dinners or things like that when Mike would literally be kicking me under the table, and I'd be like, what am I doing? What am I doing wrong? I'm having a conversation, right. And part of I remember distinctly one of the conversations that we had at some point. This is probably in the first, we've been married 29 years. This was all happening probably in the first 10 years of our marriage. And I remember very distinctly having a conversation where he was or Mike was but when you ask those things, you say those things, you're an extension of me. You're reflecting back on me. And I was I know. And I'm making you look better. I'm making you look like you have an intelligent wife. Why is that a bad thing? But he didn't see it that way.
No.
See, so it was this, it was a big deal.
It was.
And of course, then it also made me feel well, I'm just you just want me to sit in the corner and shut up and be this little quiet, and mousy wife and just stuff it down and not say anything ever and not be the leader that, I mean, and this was part of our arguments, it's just a fundamental difference. I'm look, I'm not going to change. Right. I'm not going to shut up just because you want me to. That's not happening. Right. And he was well, I can't change how I feel because I still feel embarrassed and disrespected and blah, 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 blah.
Right. And it put me out in spaces because, again, the perception at the time was I'm being drawn into situations or conversations or whatever that I didn't want to. And I felt swept up in it. And if I was honest with myself, I'd often say, well, no, I do agree with her, or I do like what she's saying, but it wasn't and it was pride. It was, all these different things that were coming up in me. And so first I had to recognize I ain't winning. You can't beat him, join him. This isn't working. My strategy here is failing. But two, I came to realize this is one of the reasons I fell in love with her. There are positive and negatives to every kind of character trait. There are always ways to perceive it. And what I came to realize is that I was somehow asking her to stop being who she is. And I was perceiving her wrongly in these situations. Wasn't in all the other situations. But in this situation, I had to look and wait and say, isn't this a gift? Isn't this something actually that I would love to have that ability? I do. And when I began shifting my thought no longer looking at trying to fix her or find a way that she could work on my design, that I could look and say, okay, God made you this way. There's
just
something,
kind of accepting
it first. Yes, exactly. Accepting it, but then also looking for the deeper good that was there, the giftedness of this. And that distinction is not always easy when we perceive it as a negative, right? But we have to look hard enough to see how God sees the other.
And I think, and I also too want to emphasize, this is not something that happened in one conversation. This is something that happened very slowly over time.
That's right. Over years.
Honestly, it was years, and there's still vestiges of that still, I think.
I sometimes kick her right now. I don't kick her.
But on my end, I think I did hold back, and I was like kind of gun shy for a while. And honestly, when I went into counseling, probably when I started doing counseling, probably about 5 years ago, one of the things that I had to deal with was was being afraid of who I was, being afraid of my strength, being afraid of my outspokenness, and realizing that's not of God. Right. God made me this way. And I had come to dislike who I was for many reasons, but I think one of them was kind of like this tension between us. And God had to heal that in me so I could get to a place of saying, no, like,
I can be powerful without being overpowering, I think is one of the phrases
that was one
of
what my counselor said to me. She was just like, I want to help you be powerful without being overpowering. And I think that was a great, it was dealing with that between us was difficult, but eventually healed by God.
Yes.
So that was something that was kind of like a perpetual thing that we couldn't solve. Any conversation we had about it, it wasn't like at the end of the conversation, we're like, okay, here's the resolution. Right. It was just
we both kind of just like, okay.
This is the differences between us. And so, but those things I think are really, it's important to recognize that they are there. And I do want to say one thing, that sometimes the differences that we can see in our spouse, and this is a very difficult thing that I'm going to say, but it's very, very important for us to recognize that you may see something in your spouse that's not just like the example that we gave, like the confidence and the, whatever, but even a vice. Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's something that really does need to change in their life.
That's right.
You can see that in them.
Yeah.
And it is something objectively that they need to change. But first of all, we have to recognize we can't change our spouse, even as much as we would love to. We can't. Anybody who's recovered from an addiction will tell you the addict has to do it themselves.
That's right.
Right? The person who is struggling with a vice, they have to do it themselves. And so that's the first thing. But also, we have to accept them.
Yeah.
And it's holding it. We as Catholics need to know that we have to hold these things in tension. This is how it is: hate the sin, love the sinner. This is very hard to do. And I don't want to just say that statement as a throwaway line, because it's not. But we are called to love our spouses and to accept them, even with their sinfulness, even with their vices. We need to accept them. We need to love them, pray for them, pray they get the help that they need, and learn how are we going to live together? How can we operate in a peaceful manner? Right. How can I accept them? And it's a hard thing to do, to hold those two things in tension, right? But that's what God's calling us to.
Yeah. And that is the call of the cross.
That's right.
It is getting to a place where, again, and ideally, these are situations that aren't, maybe it's just a change in perspective, that we see something from a new vantage point, and ideally from God's vantage point. How do they see your spouse?
Yeah.
How do they see this situation? Look for the giftedness, the strength, rather than your perceived weakness in that. But then in another situation, if it is a vice, it is a character flaw that does need to be overcome, right? What is the best strategy for that? One, for them to have the acceptance and support of a spouse.
That's right.
And the acceptance of a support of a spouse that is willing to, in good times and bad, stick with them and say, I love you, I support you,
Right.
I'm with you, and I do have a vision of how you can be.
Well, I was going to say, and hey, hint towards future podcasts. We are actually going to have a witness from a couple who overcame addiction, and that is exactly,
couple, right?
Yeah, we are going to exactly share that story, which is going to be really powerful.
And that is ultimately where we as spouses, again, we're talking about ways to get more, live more, have a fuller marriage than we've had before.
Get more out of your marriage, even with those perpetual problems.
And we all have them, right? And hopefully they're on the smaller level, but if they're on the serious level, it doesn't change the principle. It looks different.
Yeah.
And again, there is clear boundaries that you need, and the reality that if we recognize we can't change our spouse, that means that if they're in that place where there is major character flaw, addiction, they're the ones that need to do it. You can support them, but they need to own it.
Right. Okay. And then the last principle for getting more out of your marriage is create shared meaning.
And I love this.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to just jump in a little bit here, right? So the final, and I think it's like, oh, you're leading up to this. Shared meaning. What does that mean? Right? Shared meaning is, what is the life? What is the way of united life that you are building together with your spouse? That as a spouse, you or as a couple, you have given yourself to each other, right? You have sacramentally bound yourself to each other. And now you're creating things together. And part of that is children that come forth from your marriage, right? And part of that is also just a shared vision for our family and our life.
Intentional family culture.
Right.
People, that's literally what he's talking about.
100%.
Like, what are those rituals in your home that you do together? What are the dreams that you have that you're working towards together?
What are those? Yeah. What are those goals? What is those tangible realities that you're saying, I want to go there together? If you want to run fast, you run alone. You want to run far, you run together.
Exactly. And so this is like, we're like family board meeting, people. Like, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Right there, family board meeting.
Yeah. And actually kind of like going back just real quick to that example that I gave of old Jack and his wife who were in this loveless marriage. One of the reasons that they stayed together, one of the things they had is that they did have shared meanings. They had rituals they did together. They were running a farm together. They were running this business together.
Tether each other together. These shared meanings, these rituals that we do, the habits of the home, they bind our heart and our marriage together. And it sweeps us up in these common loves, these cultural traditions that we build. And the more that you can dream together as a couple about what your life is all about, the longer and the stronger your love and your marriage will be sustained. Right? And we could go on for a long time about that.
And actually, if the great thing about this podcast is that it's based on a book that you guys can go get. There's a link below, but it's called 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. And so just to review really, really quick what they are, the 7 principles are
enhance your love map,
nurture fondness and admiration, turn towards each other instead of away, let your partner influence you, solve your solvable problems, and then overcome perpetual problems and avoid gridlock. And then last, create shared meaning. So and we have some great discussion questions too that we're including, things that you can go deeper on. There's lots and lots of webs that you can make connections with one of our podcasts to go deeper in as well. Things like honoring or gratitude or date nights or family board meeting, actually. So you can go ahead and you can see those couple discussions below, as well as the references that we have that of one of our resources that connect with what we're talking about today.
All right. You covered it.
Do you want to pray?
Let's pray. Okay. And the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we pray for a renewal in all our marriages. Right now, we call down your Holy Spirit and we ask for a renewed power and strength. We want more for these marriages. We want a culture in our country, in our world, that is on fire with love for each other, that they might be marriages that make a difference, marriages that are on fire for each other, and because of you, oh God, that they are ready to take their marriage to the next level. In your name, Lord, we pray. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.